In live, I think I should just say, oh, started. Hello, everyone. Welcome, DH community. Welcome to our event. And I'm really, really excited about this one, especially because it felt like this has not been only a long time coming for us as me and Jeannine, but it just felt like since we met each other, this was something destined to happen. And a little bit backstory before we dive into the programming, but basically Jeannine, we met not too long ago, but it feels like decades now. And so the shorter version, I guess, is because I think the story that you shared was you woke up one day and you were trying to think about who to invite to your Facebook Women's Leadership Summit as a speaker, and you thought of me, thank you. And you wanted to reach out and discuss, and somehow you wanted to discuss what we're actually discussing this today on today's session and event, which is pretty miraculous. But also at the same time, after that all happened with the setup and the arrangement for the event for Facebook, then we randomly ran into each other at the Battery, which is like a club in San Francisco, which was like even more serendipitous. So I just feel like there's so many things that are aligning to have this conversation that we are having today. And a little bit more about Jeannine, though. So she's one of the probably most amazing people that is in my sphere of life right now. Not only as a person, but what she's trying to do and to truly, sincerely change the way that we're living and interacting in a more equitable way. So she's a world-renowned, respected DEI leader and practitioner. She's had career spanning Facebook, Newmont Mining, Denver Public Schools, and across the globe, places like Ghana, Peru, the UK, tons of other places. But now she is the founder and chief innovator of Inclusive Innovations LLC, and also proud to say a partner of the DH family as our chief DEIB innovator and advisor. So yeah, I mean, I love her because she wants to do the work, address things like healing, trust building, real systemic behavioral change. So Jeannine Carter, welcome.
Thank you so much. This is just an amazing opportunity. I feel very, very honored to be partnering with you on this and being able to share, what we've been up to for the last few months with the community. So thank you.
Yeah, awesome. The many reasons I've been trying to express how excited I am because there's so much alignment here. And going back to our core values, we're a very values-driven company. As many of all you know, this is totally within our lines of core value number 7, which is building community and meaningful relationships, which is kind of an obvious one here, but also number 3, which is communicate with honesty and respect. And I say that because, when people think about happiness, it's always like, oh, all the fun stuff. But I think I want to express that sometimes it's not about the fun stuff. It's also about the hard stuff and the conflicts of, what communication and conversation sometimes can have in terms of bringing up tensions and conflicts in general. But I think it's so important to have these conversations, especially now. So I just want to respect you and everyone that's listening and watching to this in terms of wanting to really create that space of safety and trust to share anything that you want to share, and of course with the audience as well, because I think it's just that much more important to get through these kind of conversations, knowing that there's a level of trust and vulnerability and being able to embrace the things that we may not know.
Indeed. All of those things are really important in terms of setting this conversation up. And I'm really, really excited to dive in.
Yeah, let's do it. So, there's so many ways that we can talk about the gravity and importance of your work. So, as you know, DH has been both on the internal and external roles of culture change. And what I find really interesting is that there's a perception or a reality that us, as culture co-creators or practitioners, we rarely work with people in the D&I field, or for you, I'm going to say DEIB for belonging, which I love. Although there's so much that we do that has both have to do with cultural change and empowering people. So I'm just really curious about what you think about that perception.
Yeah, I actually think that that perception is a reality. And I think it's about the fact that we enter at different points, and or we sometimes start at different points with different audiences or different clients. I also think that the sort of the origination of the work is very, very different. And the thing that's been missing, I think, is the collaboration of the culture work, as well as the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work. And so I think that now what's really exciting about what we've been discussing is the opportunity to integrate our different methodologies and approaches, and then offer those to clients, and bringing those things together. For instance, would be that diversity, is about increasing representation, oftentimes within corporations, for instance. And inclusion is about creating a culture in which all people can thrive. And so the culture work, oftentimes, because we've started with the diversity work, continues to work in sort of a silo as it relates to the overarching culture work that's happening. And so my goal is to really elevate the work to those culture conversations, and really start to include a DEI mindset, or an inclusion mindset, as we sometimes say in the practice.
I love that. I love that, because it just seems, I'm just visualizing in my head of how it works so hand in hand, and being able to, we have our frameworks and, whatever that might be, that chunk of, our approach, but having that DEIB lens to filter everything through, that involves people and people's systems, is just such a missing link, a missing layer, I think, to everything that we do. And I love the fact that it's so complementary. I'm going to get a little personal here, just because I really love to hear more about you. But for me, as this is resurfacing in a different way with, DIB and the conversations that are going right now, I couldn't help but go back to my first sort of interaction and experiences. Back in the day when I went to Cal, Berkeley, and freshman year, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and then Rodney King happened, and the riots happened in the streets of Berkeley, and I was just like, "What is going on here? Where am I? Where am I living?" And then also at the same time, affirmative action was this huge issue, and it was on the ballot in California, and impacted me. I'm Asian American, and so all these things, and when you're in college, you're like, I'm gonna fight, I'm gonna fight for my rights, and I had all this energy, and I felt like we were moving the needle, and I felt like there was change, right? But then, fast forward to where we are now. And you would think historical, unimaginable events that happened, and no, we're addressing that. So it should never happen again, yet it's happening again. Yeah. So I just wanted to get your take in maybe even your own stories, and knowing now that there is obviously a systemic issue that needs to be addressed, and it's not really prioritized on a day-to-day basis, knowing that stuff that happened back then, decades ago, are resurfacing in even, I would say, even more ugly ways. So how do you think we can potentially think about this differently in your life? How do you do it in our lives? How do you think we can?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you for taking us to that more personal and individual level, because that is critical to think about and to do some self-reflection around. Why is it people didn't do more when those, events happened? And I think what oftentimes happens is that sort of an apathy, in the truest sense of the word, happens sometimes, and or a denial happens as well. So, what I'm seeing is that sometimes people will, just to sort of organize it in their minds and become a little bit more comfortable with the horrificness, if you can use that word, of the event. They sort of view it as an isolated event, or maybe it's happened a few times, or sometimes, with human nature, if it doesn't apply to us, because we've got so many other things going on in our lives, we might just sort of turn a blind eye to it. And then there are folks who continue to remain concerned about it, but they don't know what to do about it. There's this model that I sometimes use called Steps to New Awareness. It's been around for a really long time. A lot of practitioners use it. But that first stage is you don't know what you don't know. And then, you find out, oh my gosh, this is happening. I just saw it on TV, like in the case of the horrific event with George Floyd and others. And then it's like, you can't not see that. So you now know what you didn't know, but then you don't know what to do about it. And so the space that I think you and I play in, for lack of a better term, or really, strategize around and provide recommendations around, is once people know and want to do something about it, what should they do? So strategic solutions around that. And if they don't know what they don't know, how do we heighten awareness around the realization that this does occur in the world? And so how do we shift the denial? How do we shift the apathy if that is the case? How do we help people become more comfortable with discomfort? So there's there's different audiences, there's different views, and I think it's our responsibility to help people shift those mindsets. And so when you talk about mindset, you mentioned that earlier, that really is what this is about. And it's paradigm shifting. And so, I think that these are some of the things that we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really totally in alignment with what you're saying. And what's kind of going through my head is that I can, somehow sense that, and this is because this just happened to me, like I can somehow sense that our dialogue in itself and what we're saying can potentially strike people in a different way. Perhaps sometimes offensively, sometimes or not, but it's just such a layered topic. And so what happened recently was like, I love when you said you don't know what you don't know, right? Like that's just a total beginner's growth mindset type of thing. And I would say I had to be reminded to get back to that space, in particular to this topic, because here I majored in Asian American studies, I minored in ethnic studies, so I would hope that that I've somewhat evolved in conscious about these things. But now I'm reminded that no, actually I need to start with that growth mindset again. But like for me, here comes the conflict, because just the other day, last week, one of my best friends, right? Do anything for her. I'd die for her. Her daughters are my goddaughters. Like we love each other. And, maybe we had one too many glasses of wine, but we just got in it about this topic. And I know she's going to be watching this later. So like, I know that, it comes from such deep love, right? For each other, for ourselves. And so I guess I just want to address that in a way, like, there are people that we love that are going to think a lot differently. And there's other people, I'm not going to talk about this, I'm not referring to my best friend on this one, but other people in the world that say, like, they're not talking about me. I'm not a racist. Like, I believe, we're all, I treat people very equally, and I'm not trying to make that light statements. I think they mean it earnestly, and I respect them for believing that. But I guess, with that kind of growth mindset on, or not, what are the biggest questions do you think we should be asking ourselves in those situations, whether it's other people or even ourselves?
Yeah, thank you so much for that personal story. I don't know how your friend's going to feel.
Exactly. I'll have to buy another bottle of wine.
So, for me, it's really, I don't want to say these are different times. I've been in the work for a couple of decades now, and I used to say that I wanted to work myself out of a job, and I'm still in this work. I remember, entering Kellogg, where I got my MBA, was the year, the summer of, the riots associated with Rodney King. And I remember already having a focus on this work and just trying to grapple with what is it that I could do differently as it related to this. And so, I too am on this trajectory of don't know what I didn't know, know what I didn't know before, and then needing to apply different behaviors and skill sets. As I look at our society today, and we were talking about this the other day, by 2043, our society, US society, will be majority minority, which means that it's going to be comprised of Black and brown people, many who have experienced the inequities and the discrimination and the overt, behavior that we've been seeing. And so I think as a society and as individuals within the society, I think we really need to ask ourselves, is this what we want to be a part of? Is this what we want going on in our society? And what is it that we need to do to change, this behavior? And I know the big question is, what is it I need to do to change? And so I think the first thing again is to know that this happens. Then to increase your awareness around the history of what's been going on. The recent events are not, new things. So for Black people, we've known that this has been going on. We've been able to dialogue about this or bring this forward through the lens of diversity and inclusion. But, for many of us, it's been about racial, inequities. But through, the corporate rooms, it's about diversity. And so if we can couch it under that lens, then, many of us do. We do take those chances and we do bring those forward. So I think, for everyone in the community who's trying to figure it out, and it's going to sound simplistic, in this short conversation that you and I are having, but it's really, acknowledging that this occurs, increasing your awareness around the differences, really doing some self-reflection, for instance, around the organizations that we belong to. Where do we shop? Who are we exposed to on a regular basis? What communities do we go into on a regular basis? Do we have exposure to difference on a regular basis? And then, analyzing that. And then what biases do I carry as it relates to the different communities? Now, the challenging thing with bias is that oftentimes it's unconscious. And so this is constant work, it's constant practice, and it's constant self-reflection. I think a lot of people think that this is something that we can just check off the list. And, I mentioned I thought that I'd be out of doing this work now. I think that I might have thought, oh, this is not, as long of a journey as I originally thought it was, but it really is journey work, it's process work. And it's a marathon. And so I think we need to stick to it. We need to stick to the actions that have actually been implemented in a lot of corporations. Keep that commitment and dedication going, and then constantly assess, are we making the impact that we set out to? Constantly research new and transformative practices. And that's sort of what you and I are attempting to do. How do we do this differently? How can we do better? And just continuing the dialogue. And then the most important thing is including the voices that this has been impacting. And I think this is what's been missing in many cases. There are organizations that have employee resource groups, don't get me wrong there. And the intention originally of employee resource groups was to be able to have places for people to voice their challenges, opportunities, ideas for transformation within companies. I think that companies should leverage and make sure that those voices are included in like the cultural values formation process, and then the plan going forward. So there's lots to think about. It's very complex. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of perceptions, as you were alluding to earlier, about the work. And there's a lot of differences of opinion about where we should start, who we should start with. But I think this is a time of complete transformation for our society, given what's occurred.
Mhm. There's so many things in what you just said that I want to respond to. Like, there's so many nuggets in there. Yeah, like, I think the last part of what you said is basically, it's like, where do I start? How do I start? It's like, basically just start. Is just the point of that one. But I was also envisioning in my head when you were talking about, like, having people in the room. There was this one time I was at a conference, and this woman walked to do, like, during Q&A, walked to the mic. She was blind. She had someone that was helping her. She's a person of color, a woman of color, and she said something I'll never forget. She said, nothing about us without us. And I realized that's an old saying now, that I totally researched that, like, oh my God, that's so genius and it's beautiful. But that's really sticking in my head a lot these days. And I think with all you're saying, like, what is so exciting, I think, and what we're trying to do now is, because I think there's a lot of smart people out there and heartfelt people out there that want to learn. They're just like, what's the click down? What's the click down of, now that we want to do something, what can that be? Or how might we change? And so that's why I'm super excited. I'm hoping this to be a series. I know we're going to work together, but a series of conversations for the audience as to what those series of click downs might be. But I do want to mention, for just to kind of round out that story, I didn't mean to throw my best friend under the bus by any means, because there was a silver lining in that, because the next morning we just acknowledged, like, yeah, maybe we should talk about this when we had one less glass of wine, but also it's like we acknowledge how important it is to even have that dialogue. And so it's just reflective of what I think should be happening in every, like, dining room, boardroom, meeting room.
Yeah. And I also think, given that story, it's a really great example, and it happens all the time in these conversations, is this is not necessarily about everyone agreeing. We can agree to disagree. It's about, the respect and the appreciation for one another, that we have different opinions, and the, ensuring that we're hearing those different opinions, considering them in everything that we do, and then applying them, as we all transform together, as humanity. And so, it's amazing work. And I think that having that open-mindedness that it sounds like you and your friend have is also what is sort of required as it relates to this work as well.
Totally. On both sides, totally. It's a stark reminder of how that actually looks.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, because you've traveled and worked all over the world, and half of our clients are international, and maybe, people, the audience watching right now. So I'm really curious how you see it from a global perspective, because so many times I hear it's such an American thing you guys have, and it's like, well, I don't think so. I don't know. I believe not, because I've traveled a little bit too. So I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, it is interesting. I have been able to do the work in lots of different places, and more times than not, audiences or participants in workshops will say, well, this is a US thing. We don't even know why you're here. Or, yeah, I have had people say that to me. And then, we have nothing that we need to really address. And luckily, they've allowed me to stay in the room and have the conversation. And, once we start to define what diversity is, what we define, what inclusion is, what's included in those definitions, people start to see, oh, that's where I am, that's where I fit into this and into this conversation. And, so you're talking about different sorts of treatment for different people. Oh, yeah. We've got that happening in our respective region or country. And then again, the open-mindedness starts. So there is always, in most conversations about this, sort of this is the way I see things. This is how I was raised. This is what I believe. And, what I am always attempting to do is get people to open their minds, start to shift their paradigm. And, once that happens, once they get to know us, once they get to know about, the empathy begins. And the willingness to hear about different stories begins. And I really believe that once that happens, then shifts start to happen. Yeah.
So in some ways, like taking it out of the context of like what it's labeled as, but actually the underlying sort of sentiment and feelings and thoughts that make it more universal.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
Sounds a lot like culture.
Exactly.
I've been thinking a lot about like we've been talking a lot about, you know, how we're going to make this work, and so I'd love to explore a little bit more about, you know, because we're about DH, we're about culture. We talk about sustainable happiness, meaning that it's about people and systems, and it's not all about the highs, it's about the lows. And especially now in this time, like in this 2020, this never ending year of 2020, there's just so many lows that we're facing right now. And so our belief is that the more you can ground yourself in your own purpose, either as an organization or as a self individual, the more you can ground yourself in purpose and values, the more the chaos can swirl around you, but at least you have a sense of self and love, and, you know, of course, with the people that you love around you. One of the ways that we do this is defining the values and then defining the behaviors. And I'm really curious from your perspective how that applies in your world and therefore our world from a behavioral change aspect.
Yeah, it's such a great question. Thank you for that. You know, this goes back to the first question that we were talking about, and that is oftentimes cultural values within organizations are set, and inclusion or anything relating to diversity is not in the value set. Now, some could extrapolate and say, oh, well, this one, you know, says this, and that pretty much means diversity and inclusion. But I'm of the mind, especially now, that we need to be explicit about it and ensure that it is included in the value set. And then there needs to be some real work done as it relates to what are the behaviors that that demonstrate that particular value. So there are things called inclusive behaviors. And there's inclusive leadership, and there's lots of research that's been written about both. And so I think that connecting the behaviors to that value would be, you know, a really, really good start. And behaviors, you know, you can break down, you can have leadership, inclusive behaviors. You can have, you know, behaviors for the entire organization. And then you can also begin to measure the behaviors. So I, like you, think that that's really, really crucial. Yeah.
Love it. Could you maybe share an example of what an inclusive behavior could be for like a leadership team or for the whole company or the whole organization?
Yeah. On the inclusive leadership level, there's been a lot of research about the importance of courage. There's been research done about the importance of humility and vulnerability in leading diverse workforces. So those are sort of like traits or, you know, different sorts of higher level behaviors that you could have embedded in what you're, you know, messaging to the org. And then in terms of individual inclusive behaviors, you know, I wish this was rocket science, but some of it is not. And, you know, one of those behaviors is, you know, truly, truly valuing differences. So we will say that diversity is about valuing differences, but sometimes I don't think that we take the time to really understand what that means. And what it really means is finding out who that employee is or that person is, finding out, you know, what their background is, what their expertise is, what are the different skill sets that they could bring to the table if you empowered them in a way that allowed them to bring those to the table. So it's really understanding, you know, all of the complexities of the person and helping them bring that out so that they are able to contribute to whatever it is that we're working on, you know, solving a problem, you know, other big solutions, etc. So, you know, I had a client once where he described how leaders were having this meeting for like an hour and they were trying to solve this huge, huge problem. And there was one person who kept saying, we should just do this. We should just do this. And the person kept trying to interject, but nobody was listening to their voice. And there was no ally in the room, which is another part of, an important part of this conversation. There was no one there to say, hey, do you see that somebody is trying to speak and has an idea? Yeah. And so he did say later, someone said, hey, what was the idea you were trying to share? And the person shared the idea, and it was the answer to the problem. So it just demonstrates that if we can hear from all the different voices, we might be able to solve the problem a little bit more quickly, and even more importantly than that, perhaps even better than we would if we just listened to the voices that we always listen to. Yeah.
I love that story. Such a powerful one. And we're getting notes from our producers saying, close it up, tie it up. I could go on, and I feel like for a long time with you, Jeannine. And every time we talk, I want to pull out my desk from my school desk from old school just to start notes, as I learn so much every time we have a conversation. But thank you so much again for being really a lead and pioneer in all of this. In such an important conversation back then and now more than ever, I believe. So I really, every time I hear about your approach and the details and the stories, I'm like, oh, there's going to be so many things we're going to do. And our 10th core value is change the world more than we ever thought possible. And I think we're on the brink of doing something really good for it.
Yeah.
So super psyched to have you on the team and bring your decades of experience and putting our heads and hearts together to do this and create inclusive cultures for all. Thank you, Jeannine.
Thank you so much. This has been great. And thank you, community, for being a part of this conversation.
Yes, so that's all we have time for today, but for the community, if you want to chat more, we're always here. And if you want to chat, with Jeannine and talking about even bringing her to your team or your company, there's going to be a link, I believe, in the comments. We're here to chat. And if you, I hope we really, really found this valuable. That's our sincere hope, to be able to make things actionable and practical. At the same time, we want to hear your feed forward, as we say at DH, your feedback. Tell us about this conversations that you're having with your own team, with your own family, your own company. We love to hear it, and because we learn from that as well. So till the next time, hope you and yours are staying safe, resilient, and well as can be. Thanks again, Jeannine, and thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.